Hmm. Yeah, I've definitely experienced the resistance to share my limits. Especially, I did an Exodus 90 thing for Advent this past year, and it was definitely difficult to go to my accountability partner, my anchor, and be, say this is where I've failed kind of in the day.
Yeah.
Um, for men that maybe don't have that, because I think that there are a lot of men that have a lot of friendships, but maybe not those friendships where they can share their weaknesses and limitations with each other. Or maybe they have, we can call them just relationships, and they can't share their weaknesses with each other with other men. Do you have any recommendations on how to get that kind of relationship culture going? Like, what about the swim team or what about your relationships with the other guys in Exodus 90 has helped or encouraged you to kind of get through that resistance?
I think oftentimes it can be being the first one to kind of open up about those things. I think that it can be a little bit of like your shields are up and you still don't kind of want to be fully vulnerable. And I think that oftentimes just being the one to open up about those things have been helpful. I think even in secular friendships, just kind of being more comfortable with acknowledging shortcomings or bringing up times that are difficult. I think that men find it harder to ask for help. It's a little bit more of like, it makes you kind of question your identity a little bit, or like, am I being a man? But we all kind of need help and need that camaraderie to get us through these difficult things. So I think that it's been kind of just opening up about those things, and then once you kind of create that avenue, then other people can feel more comfortable to share that. I think. So even in groups like Exodus, I think I noticed last year, for example, that um, it wasn't necessarily me who was the most open at the beginning. It was the other guys who had either done it before or were more comfortable doing that in group settings. And then towards the end, becoming more comfortable with sharing those things. And then kind of going into it this year and being with guys that hadn't done it before, it was already a little bit easier to do that. And you could kind of sense that, like, difficulty at the beginning in terms of like, okay, well, we all don't know each other very well and we're going to open up about like our spiritual problems or like personal problems with each other like on a day-to-day basis or a week-to-week basis. But I think being the one to kind of break through that and be like, I'm going to say it anyways, I think can be difficult, but I think it can be something that can really elevate your friendships, is just taking that step, even if you maybe haven't done that with a friend before. And there's always a risk there, and there's always kind of an area where it might not be taken the best way, or you might feel othered or judged because you open up about something. But I think that doing so, either one will open up your friendship to something deeper, or maybe kind of make you face a harsher reality that that friendship won't grow that much in a different direction. And that there might be other people that you hadn't necessarily taken the opportunity to open up about those things that are more receptive, and it could change who you maybe rely on more, or who you see as a more reliable friend. Because I think at the end of the day, that's the value of friendship, is being able to rely on each other, um, even when you're doing well or not well, kind of throughout everything, having someone that can be there for you. As I've, we're in Lent, so one of the so the way that Immaculate Conception does Stations at the Cross, I think it's the way of the cross with Scripture. And I'm not sure how common this one is, but there's a verse from Lamentations in it, that I'm not remembering it off the top of my head, but it just talks about like the value of friendship, and that you really find a treasure when you have a friend that, it will act the way that God does and that you do. And I think it just gets to this point of like, it's not just to kind of have a good time, but like to, in those times of need, be able to turn to someone to help. So yeah, I think sometimes it takes that scary step of opening up about stuff that you haven't, but it could just produce a more valuable and open friendship.
Hmm, that's really good. One of the things that I've also heard, which I've appreciated and I try to keep in mind whenever I face that resistance,
Mhm.
is everyone has problems. It's not just you, or everyone has limitations. There's a quote from David Foster Wallace where he brings up a situation of, you can be talking with whoever, it could be a friend, colleague, whoever. And he says, next time you're doing this as an experiment, just stop in the middle of the conversation and say, what's wrong? And they'll look at you and they'll be shocked and they'll say nothing. And you go, no, I can tell what's wrong. And usually you'll see like their barrier just like fall, and they'll be like, oh, like, I don't know how you could tell, but, and then they'll tell you kind of this thing. And I feel like I've experienced that kind of reciprocal, hopefully it's, that reciprocal sharing when someone does share. So no, I think that's great advice to just try and get over the hump and be the one to share or take part, engage if other people are sharing. And that normally encourages reciprocal kind of dialogue. Although, again, you make a good point that if that doesn't, then perhaps that shares or shows the true colors of that friendship. So that's definitely something to think about as men decide who they want to have in their life and as relationships.
Yeah, and I think that like over time I've kind of realized that like it's not necessarily about like the amount of friends, but the quality of those friendships. You can have like a core like 2 to 3 friends that, can be all you really need if you have a very strong relationship and you can talk about your problems open and honestly. And it can kind of be better than being distracted by like the allure of like a big friend group and you can hang out all the time, but that might not necessarily be as satisfying, I guess, in the long run, or spiritually beneficial in the sense that, friendships take a lot of time to cultivate, no matter how deep they are or not. And I think that it's worth spending that time to cultivate it with people that you can feel open with and trust and form those lifelong bonds where in a moment of um, difficulty or weakness, you can turn to them and get the help that you need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that's a major weakness of the lone wolf mentality that a lot of men have, where they claim like strength comes through like the isolation or strength comes through the being alone. But I think all the studies that I've seen have shown that isolation is not good for men. It's not good for anybody, but it's not good for men. And experts are kind of talking about this coming wave, or it's kind of already here in some regards, of a wave of isolation kind of starting or maybe being shown by the pandemic and how isolated people were, and how once those shared spaces of work or school were kind of taken away, how many relationships you were left with that you kind of had to fall back on, as you mentioned, and be in person. And so I think that there are going to be a lot of men that have to come to terms with that or have to look at that isolation. And hopefully, my hope is that they decide to then go out and find something to engage with other men on. Another thing that I think is an interesting problem, or an interesting way to solve this problem, is similar to the cultural mentors. It's hard to have like a cultural solution to this, like a overarching umbrella solution. The solution seems to really be so specific to like your environment, to kind of get in person with other guys. And so I've definitely seen Exodus 90 as a good avenue for that, or just the general parish. Do you have any kind of, if there was someone that was listening to this that has yet to make those friendships or experience those things or join those communities, do you have a kind of mentality or like a method of being able to think through like what communities you did join? Like when you moved to DC, did you kind of think through anything before you joined Immaculate Conception, or what kind of brought you to join the communities that you did once you realized that community was such an important, or that you wanted it to be such an important part of your life?
Yeah. I mean, I think, and I guess I'll go back a few steps. Like, I think that like that we are kind of seeing this general like wave of isolation happening. And I think that it's also not a coincidence that it comes with um, the rise of just different kinds of technologies and conveniences that we can have. Like you aren't dependent on anyone else to do anything. You can, have food delivered to you every single day. You can have endless content streamed to you, like at just a couple finger touches. You can kind of have it all like within the realm of technology. And I think that it can be easy when you have those moments where you're feeling lonely or isolated to kind of adopt that lone wolf mentality, or think like I actually don't need it because I can entertain myself, or I can have fun on my own, or I can find happiness in the things that I consume. And I think that there's already cultures across the world that are struggling with that. Like one that comes to mind is Japan. There's like
Hmm.
a huge epidemic there of like male loneliness. I forget the term, but there's even a term for people that like never leave their homes because they just don't need to. They have all the comforts there. Um,
Interesting.
and you have kind of like real community and people replaced by like the digital. So like one of the big things in Japan can be like dating simulators or a lot of video games and just the consumption of the different TV shows, animes and stuff. And there can be good things in all of those. And in being able to have entertainment or content that can stimulate your mind. But it's never going to really like fill that gap that community is supposed to have. Kind of to the point that I made earlier, I think that we really are social beings, and that you need to kind of thrive within a community in order to um I think find that like real identity. It doesn't come from the things that you choose to do, but more so from the relationships that you choose to cultivate. And I think that one thing that I think I've noticed kind of anecdotally in general is that a lot of guys sometimes think like, well, the solution is just I need to find a girlfriend or need to find a wife, and that will kind of be the thing that bridges that gap. But I think that even then, there's always going to be difficulties in those relationships. It's never going to be perfect, and we still kind of need brothers to rely on and get through those things. So I guess to kind of go to that point of like, what do you do if you haven't really found that community, or um, haven't like found those people specifically? I'd say the first one would just be to like try to be more involved in the parish community, like acknowledging that not all parishes have young adult groups or a men's Bible study, but hopefully there's still people that are regular parishioners that parishes tend to at least do some kind of events or like service events as well. So that can even be a way to at least start by having that like outer ring of your community of people that maybe aren't your super close friends, but you can still learn from and form a social bond where when you're going to mass, it's not just that you're going and you don't know anyone, but like, oh, I like know that older man that we did like a service event together, or that older lady that like we did like a Lenten like spiritual thing with. So I think that, as I was starting, it definitely kind of felt like, it wasn't like an immediate, like, oh, I just made a group of friends and then, everything was kind of solved. I think it definitely was kind of a gradual process of meeting people in the community, and that started to make me feel more at home by just kind of knowing the people and like friendly faces around the parish. And then, kind of doing things like Exodus or the discipleship quad, where you could kind of have that experience in a more structured way and with regularity rather than maybe the different events or various events that like your parish might do. I think that the other kind of point that can help is, I think that if you live in a city, at least there's tends to be at least some activities that you can still do with other people, whether that be, um, you know, uh, things like rock climbing or training for triathlons or like marathons. Oftentimes like kind of attract a community or like a sports group. So it can start with something small like that, where you maybe won't necessarily find friends right off the bat, or people that are maybe Catholic right off the bat. But I think even if you're kind of in that in between state and trying to figure it out, it can help to just kind of realize like, where can I, outside of the things that, I could do any day or just kind of control or consume, where could I still find people that like I have a good time with? Because I think more often than not, we find those things to be more satisfying and more enjoying in the long run. Like, I don't think that like, I remember like, oh, I had such a good time when I was like binging some TV show versus like going to a community event or going to a service event and being like, no, this is really like impactful. And you can kind of form those connections with people, I think, by just kind of being out in the world. And I think kind of changing my own inner mindset of like, no, I'm not going to find that by just doing the things that I want to, but trying to find community and something where I'm doing something at least with other people can help.
Hmm. I think there are men that have a timeline that they expect to be able to find that, or maybe it's just that they desire to be able to find that. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering if we could speak to them a little bit. How long, in your experience or from what you've seen from other people, how long would you let other people, other men know it takes to kind of make close friends once you join a parish? Has there been a consistent kind of time, or maybe it's varied, but I'd be curious to see your thoughts on that.
Yeah. I mean, I think it varies, but I think that in general, it won't be like right off the bat. Like it does take some kind of time and consistency to just meet different people. I mean, you can meet people that are Catholic, but you're not necessarily going to be friends with, and like it might be nice to just see them around the parish and everything. But um, I think that it does take time to just kind of find like your crowd or those people. But regardless of that, it's still nice to just like know more people in the community. And I think that, even in doing Exodus or the discipleship quad, like it's not as if like right off the bat, it just formed this like, a bunch of friendships, but it is kind of a gradual process of getting to meet people and going through the experience to where afterwards, I think you do have at least a stronger bond and someone that like knows what you went through and like knows like, some of like the things that you're going through spiritually or that you want to achieve. And that I think is valuable in and of itself, not even just a very deep relationship, but those outer rings of relationships of the general community that people used to have as a part of everyday life that we've kind of stopped having. I think that there used to be a lot of more intermediary institutions where people would make friendships or at least kind of like see people routinely and need to interact with them, and we've kind of lost that. But I think that um, even just forming that outer ring can help. But yeah, it can be a slow process, or it might take a while to find that. But especially if you live in a city, there's usually like a couple parishes that you could try to at least go to. And I think sometimes it can just take, doing the extra step of agreeing to do something, or taking that initiative to like ask someone if they want to go get lunch or get food or, do something together outside of those parish structures, because they, I think, can be a good foundation, but there's always that extra initiative that you need to take regardless outside of that to really make those connections form into, I guess, like a deeper friendship.
Thank you. And thank you so much for this conversation. We're coming up on time, but the way that I like to end every episode is by asking you, what would your top recommendation to men today be? It doesn't have to be regarding the topics of today, although it definitely can. But just what would your top recommendation from your experience or from what you've learned to men today be?
Yeah. Um, I guess I would say that consistency and optimism are important. It can be easy to try to start something and, feel like, oh, this isn't necessarily going somewhere, or I'm not really meeting as many people as I thought I would. Um, but I think that consistency is the big thing that kind of helps with community, is just kind of being able to go to something, and you might go to, a men's Bible study once and not really meet anyone, but after you go for a couple months, other people kind of come and go or join, and that can kind of help to just broaden your horizons. And I think just optimism, because um, it can be difficult to, I think when things are in the real world and you're interacting with people, it's not going to be as like satisfying immediately or the way that you want it. I think that we've kind of grown accustomed to getting things our way and the way that we want it. We can kind of structure our lives to be very particular. But I think part of, growing in the faith and growing in friendship with other people is being able to kind of break out of your own comfort zone a little bit and meet people where they're at too. So I think that those two things are probably the biggest piece of advice I'd give. That when you're doing something, consistency is really important to just be able to fully explore it and give an option its depth, and then optimism because it can be difficult. I know people who are in parish communities that don't have like a very big young adult group, but just being able to have optimism that like maybe there's someone here that I can still, have a good friendship with, whether they're older than me, younger than me. I think it's important to just have, faith that things can get better and that, I think it's part of just the spiritual life that we have to be optimistic that there's good at the end of the tunnel and that, there's good in store for us. And even if we don't necessarily see where God wants us to go, the fact that he is calling us to do something or that we feel stirred to be a part of a community or find deeper friendships is part of that journey that we're going to be walking on.
Thank you for watching The Making of Man. If you liked that episode, please click here for more, and remember to like and subscribe.